Everybody, and welcome to week 5. This is one of my favorite topics. This week we will talk about the weeding part of the collection life cycle. The very first question we all need to ask ourselves is, does the collection help meet the library's mission? That is the whole point of having a collection, and weeding is one of the things that can help rebalance to help your library meet its mission. We also ask, are you proud of your library's collection? And if so, and we hope that you are, what is it that you're proud of? Is it the depth or the breadth of the collection, the currency, its relevancy to your patrons and your community? Or do you find that you're defensive of your library's collection and say things like, it's the best we can do with the limited funds or space or staff that we have? So when you visit other libraries, how do you compare your collection to theirs? You've seen this diagram before. This is the collection life cycle, and I've included it again this week to remind you that collection management is not just selection and weeding. It's really easy to get stuck between buying and weeding and buying and weeding and buying and buying and buying. But a reminder that all these other things happen to a collection throughout its life cycle. We choose it, we buy it, we process and catalog it, it gets shelved, it gets used, it gets reshelved and reused. Occasionally it gets repaired. And so by the time you get to the weeding portion of the life cycle, you know that you've done all that you can for it. A good library is like a good haircut. It's not what you cut, it's what you leave. Weeding is about finding and highlighting the best of the collection. Old and useless items, they clutter the shelves and they make it hard to find the good stuff. A good haircut says that a person cares about their appearance and wants to represent themselves in a certain way. And a good library does the same thing. A quality collection helps the overall appearance of the library, because when the collection is clean and relevant, it has shiny, relevant items on the shelf, it tells people that you care about the library and that you take care of the resources they pay for. Libraries are not in the business of collecting things, but providing content and access to content. We don't collect books because they're books. We collect the information that they hold. And this quote was written before Library of Things was a thing. But even those collections, even physical collections like Libraries of Things, puppets, magnifiers, whatever you have, they're collected for their access and the service they provide, not because they're things. So even with Library of Things, we collect them for the service that they provide. Same with books. We collect them for the information they hold, not because they are books. There are all kinds of excuses that staff give for why they don't like to weed, and here's one of them. But the public doesn't get it. You're right, they don't get it. It's not their job to get it. So keep some examples of really old or bad condition books at the reference desk, or show them off of librarybooks.net, which is a website my colleague Mary and I have maintained since 2009. We've got all kinds of examples there of why we weed that make it pretty clear and pretty obvious. You want to go slow when you're weeding because a little at a time is easier to explain to people. More on that later. And also keep in mind that the library board and other staff in the library don't always get it either. Their questions about weeding are just as valid, maybe even more important, since they need to understand how the library works as representatives of the library themselves. I told a story in a previous lecture of a previous employee who worked in a large library where a board member asked her, when are we going to be done building the collection? So that board member didn't understand selection. He probably didn't understand weeding either. We need to explain to them and educate the public, the patrons, the board members, our staff in other departments, what weeding is, how collection management works, so that they can talk about it too. We never want to shove policy in people's face and explain that we weed because the policy says we have to. You do need a weeding policy, and it may help you form the appropriate words and phrases to use when explaining it, but we want to be friendlier and more positive when we explain how weeding works. A librarian friend of mine at another library likes to tell people who ask about weeding that she's selecting for the book sale. And she is. That's not spin or a lie. We aren't hiding that we're managing and maintaining our collections. We're not hiding that from the public. But I love this phrase, selecting for the book sale, because people get excited about a used book sale, and you can tell them that you're making space for new items coming in, which they're also excited about. If you're weeding extra copies, point that out. If you're weeding bad condition items, show them. If you're weeding old or weird items, show that too. But also include some positive reasons for weeding that patrons can get excited about. When they tell their friends and their neighbors that they were at the library, you don't want them to say, and they were throwing out books. You want them to be ambassadors for the library and share that the library is gearing up for a book sale, that we have new books coming in, and that our books are so well used that sometimes we need to replace them. Let's start talking about a weeding plan. A weeding plan is absolutely crucial to put in place before you start any weeding project, and especially a big weeding project. It shows that you've put thought into the process and you aren't just pulling things off the shelf willy-nilly. One thing you want to acknowledge is how weeding looks physically to the public. If they see piles of materials, they will definitely ask what's going on. This is just asking for attention. Of course, people will ask what's going on. Avoid major piles and full carts in public places. Take a bit at a time to out-of-sight places. The image on the screen here is an office at a real library, and this office was viewable from a public space. So people ask all the time, what's all that stuff back there? It's not, again, that we're hiding what's going on. There are legitimate reasons why we are maintaining the collection, but you're just asking for questions, right? Manage the process of weeding just like you manage the collection. Do a little at a time, avoid those major piles, put them in out-of-sight spaces. Your weeding plan needs to work through the entire deselection process. How many items will be removed at a time? How many items will be removed total? What is the workflow? Include who will touch the materials, what they will do with them, how many times they will change hands through the process. How will they be moved? Carts, boxes, piles, storage rooms, public service desks? You need to be very specific so that when people see what's going on and they start to ask questions, you can explain what weeding is, but having that weeding plan and explaining exactly what's going on, especially for this really applies most to really big weeding projects. Like, we need to clear out 30% of the collection to make space for a new makerspace, or we're building study rooms and we have to clear out enough materials to make space for that. And so we're being very careful to make sure that only the items that are no longer relevant to our policy are being removed. All of that goes into the weeding plan. No one needs to be surprised, especially staff. When you hear about these libraries in the news that, the staff doesn't understand what's going on either, just they know that thousands of items were being removed all at once. You need to get that buy-in, and the weeding plan does that. How many items are going to be removed? How many items are going to be removed total at a time? Total. Who's doing what? Where is it all going to go? Why does it need to happen in the first place? A weeding plan really can help with the public relations aspect of this process. What are people supposed to think? This is not a picture of any particular library that we're aware of. It's just a Creative Commons licensed photo from Flickr. So I don't know where it came from or what the context of this photo is, but what are people supposed to think when they see a dumpster full of books? Appropriate and respectful removal of library materials is so important. You simply cannot fill up dumpsters with library materials. It looks careless, and it is careless. The weeding plan must clearly state where the materials will go once removed from the collection. There are times when you need to dumpster a book. If it is damaged beyond reuse, it's moldy, if the weeding plan says that's what's going to happen to them and you have legitimate, responsible reasons why that's where they need to go, that's okay. But the weeding plan clearly needs to state why they're there and what's going to happen to them. Better alternatives to dumpsters are companies like Better World Books or Thrift Books. There's a bunch of them. Friends of the Library book sales, prison libraries, craft programs, recycling, pulping. There are other options for disposal of weeded material. So look into what's possible in your community. Instead of that weeding frenzy attack, make collection management part of your daily, weekly, or monthly routines. Weeding is one part of the collection management life cycle. We saw that collection life cycle graphic. Weeding is one piece of that, but it is an important one. If you ignore the collection for a year or more, you're bound to have a lot of items to weed when you get around to it. So avoid the weeding frenzy by having a weeding plan in place that acknowledges regular collection maintenance, including weeding. So here's how to do it. Automated reports is the first arrow there. Voila, a report shows up in your email inbox once a week or once a month. Glance at it, sort it a few ways, last circulation date, the publication date, the call number, sort and sort and sort by the different columns. Create a watch list for items that keep showing up on the report repeatedly. You don't have to weed anything every single time that you get these reports, but this way you're looking at suspicious items regularly. Number 2, use the help available to you. Pages, volunteers, library science students. Empower all staff to flag items to your attention. Library science students would be thrilled to help you with some of the weeding process. You can make the final decision, but they can learn from it, and you can get the help. Give some items another chance. Make a last chance display. I always think that's kind of fun. Put items on display that have been on your watch list and see if they start going off the shelf. People just don't maybe browse the old shelf. They browse the new shelf, but they don't go digging through the backlist. Make a from the backlist bookmark, maybe. Give things another chance. And walk the stacks. A quick stroll every week or once a month will keep you aware of what your collection looks like. Look for spacing, duplicates, condition, dust, peeling tape. Pick a handful of items to reconsider, and that means look into, not necessarily to weed. So all of these things will ensure that every item gets individual attention and that careful decisions are made. And so it's part of your weekly or your monthly routine that you're just paying attention to what's going on. You're looking at how things are circulating and what's not circulating and what kind of condition things are in, what it looks like. It doesn't take much time if you sort of keep up with it. One of the other excuses we hear all the time is, but it's historical. This applies more to public and school libraries than academic or archives, which may have a different reason to keep items because they're historical. So my question to you is, do you get historiography questions? Would it be better to buy a newer book that places the subject in historical context? So look at the book on the screen, Why President Richard Nixon Should Be Impeached. Spoiler alert, right? There's a perfectly good reason to have this book. Your patrons may be interested in the history of the Watergate and Nixon and how he resigned and all of that. But would it be better to buy a newer book on this topic that places that subject in historical context? This book is from 1973 when it was all going down. Somebody had an opinion about why Nixon should be impeached, and they wrote a book, and here it is. This is a little bit ridiculous to have on a neighborhood, branch, whatever, public library shelf today. Are primary sources important to your clientele is another part of this discussion. Where else can they get primary sources? If your library has a special collection, local history maybe, or just a special collection of primary sources that are important to your clientele, if your patrons, do this level of research and it's important to them, then keep it. That's great. That's part of your mission. That should be part of your collection policy. But If not, if you are like my public library, we're a popular materials public library. Our patrons don't do this level of research. Where else can they get primary sources? We can send our patrons to the University of Michigan, which is an amazing university with lots of great libraries that have lots of amazing special collections and primary sources and all of that. They're, 20 minutes from us. The Library of Michigan is about an hour away. They have a reason to have this kind of material. Our public library does not.
One of my other favorites, but someone might need it. I want to know who. Who needs it? When was the last time someone needed it? And where else could they get that information if they really did need it? The book on the screen here is adorable. It is super cute. Someone would buy it in a second in a book sale. We have a toddler with a sewing needle, and we have a boy with a claw hammer aimed at his face with no safety goggles in sight. This book is too old. It's from 1953. Cute, sure. Some of these materials that the projects call for don't even exist. You can't buy them in store. They have you reusing cans of things that you can't even buy anymore. So it's not even that useful as a craft book. Craft books don't seem at a first thought something that would go out of date. They last quite a while, actually. 1953, I'm going to say that's kind of pushing it. Pinterest is a thing. You can find all kinds of great youth craft projects on Pinterest if you cannot afford to buy a new book on the subject. Here's another one of my favorites, but I don't have time to weed. I'm going to be the mean boss for a minute, just to make a point. I promise I'm not really that mean, but I want to sort of be excessive to make my point here. And my point is, if weeding is a part of your job, then you are obligated to make time. If it was made clear to you when you were hired and in your job description that collection management was one of your duties, and managers, you need to make it clear what that entails. If all they're going to do is selection, that's fine, but then you can't expect them to do all of the other duties that come with collection management. If weeding is part of the gig, it needs to be in the job description. Somehow library staff find time for selecting, because that's fun, right? Buying materials, buying new books, that is super fun. We find all kinds of time for the review process and the selection process. We just, for whatever reason, don't find the time for weeding. It's dirty, it takes a while. Honestly, if you keep up with it, it doesn't take much time. I don't put a lot of time into weeding my collections because they're always pretty well weeded. The continuous and ongoing thing, if you really keep up with it, I mean, less than an hour a week is what I put into weeding. I get those reports in my email, I sort them, I see what is on the watch list, I go walk the stacks, I see what looks like it needs to be weeded, and every now and then I do a deeper dive into the collection to really look at those benchmarks and things like that. But it doesn't take nearly as much time as the weeding frenzy or that big once-a-year weeding attack takes. Mostly, though, if it's your job, you don't get to say that you don't have time. Managers, it's your job then to schedule the time. Make sure your employees can make the time. If you make time for selection or any other part of your job, you have to make time for weeding too.
You want some good examples of why you need to make time for weeding? Well, here's your first one. This is called Getting Fired. It was published in 1974, and it has super helpful advice like how to lie on your resume, how to lie to your wife if you got fired, because, nobody else works. And there was helpful advice because everyone probably gets a big old bonus payout when you leave a job. There wasn't one relevant fact in this entire book. Here's another one, a tax book published in 1991, way more than, 10 years old or so at the time that it was found on the library shelves. Just so you know, when you're talking about tax books, you only need to worry about the last 7 years. And even then, the average public library doesn't need to hang on to these books for even that long. Anyone revising their taxes 7 years later has bigger problems or issues than this type of book is going to help them with. This might be the worst awful library book I've ever found in my career. It's called Rites of Passage at $100,000 plus. In 1995, how many people, that the public library serves were making $100,000 or more? Back then, not a lot of people. So let's look at some of the passages in this book that are just beyond awful. They suggest you include your height and weight on your resume, but listen to this. Nice to put in if it's favorable, although women often omit weight because it seems sexist to raise the subject. I mean, you think? Overweight men and women might consider listing an optimistic weight toward which they're dieting as a way of cushioning the inevitable visual shock with some advance notice. That is ridiculous. The race one is even worse. It says, probably silence. For all minorities but black, surnames dispel any impending visual surprise. Hardly a major consideration anyway. For the black who wants to dispel surprise, mentioning support of any obviously black institutions, possibly along with similar non-racially defined institutions, will do the trick. Having this on a public library's shelves, let alone even in 1995, it was awful. If this is hanging around at any public library now because they didn't weed, this is hurtful on so many levels. If there was library malpractice, if that was a thing, this book would fit the bill. It's just awful. Here's another excuse for why people say they don't like to weed. They say, but it's in good shape. Why would we read a book that's in perfect condition? Well, guess what? If you have a book from 1960 and it's in perfect shape, it's because no one ever wanted it. This particular example had a binding that absolutely cracked when it was open. Literally no one had touched it. It's cute. For nostalgia purposes, it would probably sell quickly in a book sale, but it really has no place on contemporary public libraries' bookshelves. If weeding has been neglected for a long time and you have a lot of weeding to do, resist the urge to do it all at once. You need to set reasonable standards. You can't start at the, everything that hasn't circulated in 3 years. Benchmark. Start with a much lower standard, like 10 years, or maybe even more depending on your situation. Resist an all-encompassing standard. You can't weed everything older than 10 years. Every item deserves individual attention. You also need to set a reasonable timeline. Don't try to weed everything, even if it legitimately needs to be weeded, in 1 month or even in 1 year. Pace yourself in a way that's manageable and doesn't, garner attention. The books didn't all materialize in 1 week or 1 year, and they don't need to be purged instantly either. You can relax and take your time with this. If you do have a reason to need it gone quickly, for construction purposes or maybe an RFID project, consider storage or warehousing for some of it and continue to pace yourself. If that's not possible, be as transparent about your weeding needs as possible. Hold a town hall meeting and ask for genuine input from the public and the staff. Ask for suggestions on how much, what kind, and where to put weeded materials. Find out what they're comfortable with and be sure they understand the situation. Get the public to help you do the work. If they help come up with the plan, you have instant buy-in and support. So let's learn how to make weeding easy. Your first pass can simply be to remove some duplicates. This is a photo taken from our shelves at Plymouth Library several years ago now, but look how many Michael Connelly books there were. There were just, 4 copies of his older works. We could free up a lot of space just by clearing out some duplicates in our collection. And this doesn't take a lot of forethought or planning to do. You can literally just walk the stacks. You don't need any sort of reporting or anything like that. Just look for the duplicates If you know your collection well, you know how many copies of things need to stay and need to go. Clearly at the Plymouth Library, we buy a lot of copies of Michael Connelly. He's popular. We probably buy 6 copies of all of his new books. They get whittled down over time. When we're looking for space, we can find some quick space through duplicates at our library. It's just a good, easy place to start. The next step is to look at books in bad condition. Now, clearly the photo here is an exaggeration to make a point. The books on your shelves do not look like this. This particular book had fallen in a puddle and it was shelved wet. A bad idea to begin with. This is mold. It had spread to the shelf above it and the shelf below it. We probably wiped out 3 shelves worth of books because this disgusting mold had spread. My coworker Mary, that's her hand holding the book. I took this photo. Again, it's an exaggeration for the sake of making a point here. In fact, a friend of ours who's a biologist swabbed this book. She put it in a petri dish to see how fast growing this mold was. She said within hours it popped the lid on the petri dish. So that is disgusting. A patron actually brought this to our attention and we were absolutely mortified. From the spine, this book looks shiny and fresh and fine. It's not until you put your hands on the book sometimes that you notice what's going on with it. So, when you're actually doing this step 2 and a quick weed based on condition, you can easily find materials with yellow pages, with rips and tears, with peeling tape and stickers, a little bit of dust. Hopefully you don't find any mold. Hopefully it's less severe than that. But condition is another just quick walk through the stacks. You don't need a report. It's great if you do a full inventory of the collection and put your hands on all the items, but this weeding step is not meant for that. It's meant to just take a look at, what kind of condition the books are in. Yellow pages, the rips, the tears, the peeling tape and stickers, things that are dusty are an indicator that they've been there untouched for a while. Weeding made easy step 3 is stupid. When you start really looking at the items on your shelf, you find all kinds of weird things and you're like, how did this even get here? I've never noticed it before. It's just weird. So my coworker Mary and I had a website called Awful Library Books. It exists still as an archive, awfullibrarybooks.net. But these are some examples from our website. Diet, Crime, and Delinquency. He's stabbing a donut. That's hilarious. And then Glamour Puss with the kitty wigs. Again, just ridiculous. So this step is getting rid of the obvious stupid. And remember that what's obviously stupid for one library is not necessarily obvious or stupid for another. Follow your library's mission and your policy. Knowing your collection will make them a lot easier to spot. You can also run a shelf list by publication date and you'll find these quickly just by walking the stacks. Things jump out at you that are just plain weird. Even if you never get this far to step 4, you've still made a big dent and you've done something. So you can feel good about clearing out the duplicates and the bad condition things and the weird items. So if you get this far, that's great. If not, you've still done something. So some simple reports and ways to sort the shelf lists in Excel that any library can benefit from. You can run reports of all items older than a certain age and then limit to a specific collection. Keep in mind that medical, legal, business, technology books have probably a shorter benchmark on age, average age for the items. So you could run that report of all items older than a certain age, all computer books older than 3 years, or all legal books older than 5 years, or whatever makes sense for your community and your library. You can run a no-circ report. no circulations in 3 years, 5 years, whatever your library is comfortable with. Again, that criteria is specific to a collection. A Latin dictionary that hasn't circulated in a year is probably okay. You know, a James Patterson novel that hasn't circulated in a couple years is probably on the chopping block. You can see how the criteria for those items is very different. You can look at the date something last circulated. Maybe it has 100 circulations, which sounds good, but it hasn't gone out in the last 10 years or the last 15 years. So having a lot of circulations doesn't necessarily mean it was recently used. There is, of course, also that total circulations report. I would run that in the opposite direction. So if total circulations lowest to highest, what's not circulating or what items have the least circulation in a collection? I'm keeping in mind that newer items haven't had time to circulate. So you want to give them, you know, their own benchmark that makes sense for how many times things circulate each year that you own them. And then, of course, publication date tells you how old or new those items are. Now, remember, just because a title shows up on a report does not mean you have to weed it. It just flags your attention to those items. Censorship is a hot topic these days, and I hope that libraries are having meaningful discussions about it with staff to prepare your staff for, you know, when and if you might have to have these discussions with patrons. So let's look at some definitions. Censorship is the willful suppression or prohibition of material. It's when you are purposely keeping people from accessing material. That's what censorship is. Weeding is the removal of materials that no longer serve the mission and the policies of the library, but which you may be able to provide access via interlibrary loan or online or something like that. The purpose of weeding is not to keep people from the material. It's to manage the library's collection and to offer only the best information. You know, if somebody wants some old weird thing, I'll do my best to find it for them. You know, I don't need to know their reasons why they want it. I may recommend something newer as well, but a lot of times we can get whatever we need through interlibrary loan, maybe an online resource, a database, an e-resource. Even those are going to be kept hopefully pretty up to date though. So the difference is censorship is purposely keeping people from accessing material. Weeding is removing materials that no longer serve the mission or the policies of the library. So hopefully it never gets this far, but there could at any time be a formal challenge to something in the collection, and you want to be ready for it. Having a strong collection development policy is a great start, as we've been talking about. But you also need to have a form and have a process in place for people to formally challenge the collection if that's what they choose to do. Having a form that asks them for all of the information, what is the title and where did they find it. We actually at our library ask people to find some reviews of the item so that they're clear about the editorial reviews that exist for that item. But we also resist the urge to go straight to our form. When people, and I have been asked for the reconsideration form, and I will happily give it to anyone who asks, but I also want to talk to them. I want to listen to them and I want to help them. I want to ask them where they found the item and what were they looking for at the time, and how they can ask staff for reviews before they check something out, how they can ask us to help them find materials that match their value systems and their worldviews. We will listen to you. We will help you find what's appropriate for you and for your family and for your needs. So while I will give you the form, I really want to come across as nice customer service and just friendly people who want to hear about what people want. Do we not have enough materials that match their value systems? That's a legitimate thing. We want to make sure that we have a balance in our collection and that there's enough materials on all sides of a topic for people to be satisfied for what they're looking for, keeping in mind that that may not be a physical book. I often will recommend people use our research databases or online resources, ebooks. That content can exist even if it's not in a physical book on the shelf. But having a discussion with someone and letting them know that staff will help them and that there are other avenues to get to the information that they want is also an option. There are institutions like the American Library Association, everylibrary.com is an advocacy group that will help you. If things get out of hand or they escalate quickly and things get heated, you can get help from these advocacy groups. Here, as always, are a list of articles. Everything is linked in the module. So give some of these things a good read. We have a suggested discussion post topic for this week. You've been asked to weed 20% of the adult fiction collection to make room for a new makerspace. In a collection of 30,000 items, 20% amounts to 6,000 items. That is a large weeding project. So what information would you include in a weeding plan for this project? As always, you can discuss whatever you like in this week's discussion post. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you all come up with. Have a good week, everybody.